Today I would talk about curiosity and the role of curiosity in our practice as Buddhists. Let's start off first with curiosity, a dictionary definition of curiosity. And the one I found on Google was a strong desire to learn or know something. So, strong desire to learn or know something. And if you've been practicing Buddhism for a long time, then you know that desire typically leads to suffering. So already there's a problem with the word, with the term curiosity. And I'm going to come back to that aspect of desire and curiosity. So curiosity is an openness to new understanding. It's an acknowledgement that there's more to learn, there's more to see, there's more to experience. Curiosity is driven by the how, what, where, why, and when. And if we think back, if you were present ever to one of Master Thich Quang Tri's talks, he sometimes discusses the meditation on why, where you simply continue to ask yourself why. And I'll return back to that technique a little later also when we talk about curiosity in our practice. But let's start off with just thinking about curiosity as an openness, a willingness to learn, a desire to learn. And so right there, we have some potential problems, potential conflicts with Buddhism. And we have to be also mindful that curiosity is not inherently bad or good, right? In fact, we have the saying, curiosity killed the cat. So we have an acknowledgement that curiosity isn't always a good thing. Being curious about the wrong thing can lead us to a lot of problems. Curiosity tends to be problematic when it is an ego-driven desire. Right? It's an ego-driven desire that leads to attachment. So let me unpack that. In Buddhism, we have a lot of warnings against feeding the ego or building up the ego. If anything, we want to try and reduce the ego. We talk about reducing desires because desires are at the root of our suffering. And we also talk about attachments or grasping or reaching as also a source of suffering. So when curiosity is driven by the ego or driven by desires, it can be, from a Buddhist perspective, problematic. Let me give you an example. Let's say I am curious to learn about psychology, but my curiosity to learn about psychology is because I want to learn how to I want to get a PhD so I can feel better than everyone else. I want to learn about psychology so that I can read people's minds or gestures, or I can, which psychologists can't do. So let me give that little caveat. We can't read minds. But let's say there's this ego-driven curiosity about psychology because I wanted to use it for my own selfish purposes. So there is ego and there is a desire and there is a way where curiosity is not going to be a very helpful thing. There's also curiosity for, I want to learn about my enemy. That way I can have power over them because information is power. So there's the curiosity, there's a desire for knowledge, and there's that ego element, which is, this is for my own selfish desires. So curiosity can be ego driven, can be a desire, it can lead to attachments. So we have to be careful with that aspect of curiosity. But when we approach curiosity or use curiosity as a way to be open and free of expectations, right? I want to learn about psychology because I want to learn more about myself and humanity, and I want to help people. I want to learn about teaching and be a teacher because I want to be able to educate and influence young minds. Okay, so this curiosity then becomes an openness. It's not a desire or attachment. Here's an openness to new knowledge. And instead of being ego-driven, it's other-driven. I want to help others. I want to teach others. So this is where the curiosity can become a healthy thing for a Buddhist practice. Curiosity about oneself and inquiring about oneself is an essential part of the Buddhist practice. And so it's critical to cultivate a healthy form of curiosity, to want to learn about um, ourselves, what makes us tick, what are those things, those bad seeds and good seeds, some of which we inherited from a very young age. And according to some sutras or some philosophies, some of these good seeds, bad seeds, you inherited from past lives. And so be curious about this aspect of yourself, and what it says about others as well, in order to not make it such an ego-driven thing, can be very powerful. Another way that curiosity can be powerful is during conflicts. So a lot of times during conflicts, the desire and the discussion is to be right. But if you approach a conflict with the desire to know more about the other side, the other, then it can be the start. It can be the start of a healing process. And so in a time in our nation where we have such political divide, such racial divide, being curious about the other, being curious about what makes these individuals who do not think like us think the way they do, can be the start of a healing process. Right? If in terms of racial divide, being open to the fact that you, by being raised in this society, are biased. Right? Maybe not necessarily an overt racism, but if you were raised in this nation with our educational system, with the TV that we had growing up, then inherent in the messaging that got put in your brain is bias. And I had a recent experience where I retook a bias test that looked at bias in for multiple things, not just African, not just blacks, but disabilities, women, religion. So there's a free place you can go to, a free website that collects data on this bias. And although I had taken this same measure, almost 15 years ago, and I was shocked at how much bias I had. And I was the director of multicultural diversity, of trying to recruit for the programs. I was very much involved with the multicultural departments. I was dating an African American woman, and I was joining in many of the Black events. And still, I had tons of bias, and it was very hurtful. And it was hurtful again to see that when I took it recently, there's still some bias. So it's not as strong as it was before, but it's still there. And so we have to be open to the possibility and curious about learning about the experience of our African American, of our Muslim, of our others, brother and sisters, to learn about their experience and be open to the fact that we may hold and harbor some unconscious biases. So there is a benefit of curiosity. There's a way we can use curiosity in a way that is not ego-driven and is not a form of attachment. So what happens? Why do we see that curiosity is no longer as strong there as it maybe had been before? Why are we no longer as curious as children, for example? We see children being very curious. So why is it that we as adults start to lose some of this curiosity, especially given the many benefits that I've discussed of having curiosity? Well, there's one person I recently listened to who described it this way. They said that with age and wisdom comes is the belief that little by little you have less to figure out, that you've figured things out for yourself. You have your ideas of how things should be. This feeling that you have it figured out kills curiosity. So the feeling that you have figured it out kills curiosity. When you feel that you've figured it out, you close your mind to other possibilities because, nope, this way works for me. One thing I say to myself that I find very helpful in those times is, if you have it all figured out, why are you still suffering? And so I'll say that to myself when I get too cocky or too arrogant or feel that I have it all figured out. And like, if I had it all figured out, I would no longer be suffering. And so that helps me then continue to be curious, helps me to be open to questioning drives, motives, why I do things, and what are the underlying seeds that produce my behaviors, my thoughts, my words. So it's important to cultivate this curiosity. And what I want to do now is talk about different ways to cultivate curiosity. I'm going to give you 3 or 4, and the last one is kind of combined but could be separated into 2. So I'm going to give you a couple of things you can try to help cultivate curiosity. The first one is to simply observe someone that you consider to be very curious. And very often, children fit perfectly into the most curious individuals I know. And so taking some time to observe children, how their sense of wonderment at something new and how they ask questions. It was tough. And there were times I tried not to tell my kids, to stop asking me why. But I tried to allow them to continue asking why and explain as best I could. But observing children, observing how they ask those whys and keep asking questions, and they're curious about the world. That can help model for us what curiosity is and how we should cultivate, or behaviors we could even model and imitate to be more curious. You'll often hear also in Buddhism from various teachers this idea of the beginner's mind or fresh eyes. Okay, so you want to cultivate this beginner's mindset. And if you think about when you started something for the first time, when you were a beginner at something, think about how open you were to try, to test, and to experiment. How open you were to come to the event with preconceived notions. Or if you had those preconceived notions, they were easier to break, easier to undo because you held on to them loosely. And so they were more malleable and you allowed for change. A teacher called Master Shunryu Suzuki once said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert mind, there are few." So the beginner's mind is you have endless possibilities and openness to new ways of thinking, willingness to try, to test, and to experiment. So cultivating that in your practice can be very beneficial. Trying something new can help jolt that tendency to become stuck in our routine. And I'm not talking about, I usually wear gray t-shirts, so I'm going to try wearing a red t-shirt now. I'm talking about really trying something very new that really stretches your way of thinking. And so, for example, I don't believe in, let's say, the Bermuda Triangle. But I can still take a time to learn about what other people say about the Bermuda Triangle or flat Earth theory, even though I know it's not something I'm going to believe in, but just learning about it challenges my mind and causes me to maybe think in new ways and can consequentially cultivate creativity as well. So trying something new, learning about something new, especially if it's something completely different, are ways of cultivating curiosity. So an example of this is I recently for when the pandemic started, my wife and I got a subscription to an educational video service and something we could play for the kids or something to supplement what the kids were learning. And they had information, they had classes there for adults and kids. And one of the courses that I took, because it was something completely different, was on war strategies, war theory. I was like, holy moly, you're a Buddhist. Why are you, my wife was like, you're a Buddhist. Why are you studying about war? As I was learning these theories of war and going all the way from Sun Tzu to more recent individuals, I realized that the Buddha, being a prince, would have also been educated on the theories of war. And that did not occur to me until I started taking this course and they started talking about the theories of war from the East, where it started there with Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and then some of the war theories from the area of India and Nepal. How would that have influenced the Buddha's thinking? How would that have influenced the Buddha's perspective? And so if I hadn't challenged myself to go something completely opposite, that's a realization I never would have had. So being curious can cultivate and bring you new insight. Right? Being curious allows you to remain fluid. In my discussion of impermanence, I talked about how rigidity or holding on to something and thinking that something should not change will create more suffering for yourself. And so curiosity allows you to be more fluid and more malleable, more able to go with the Tao, the flow, with the river of life or the universe. Okay? Being curious will allow you to grow faster, spiritually, psychologically. It will bring you closer to enlightenment. Being curious is the start of healing. If you're not curious about your monsters, if you're not curious about your pain or your hurts, if you're not curious about your past traumas, it's hard to start that healing. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have experienced some significant trauma that you've not worked on yet, then things like that of such intensity, you should work on with someone else. All right. You can work on tidbits on your own, but the major, really intense emotional aspects are best worked with someone else who is experienced and knowledgeable about trauma. But the healing starts with curiosity. The union of, or the healing of the division starts with curiosity. The growth, the getting out of the rut starts with curiosity. I'll leave it at that. Now I'll just simply open it up and feel free to discuss any comments, thoughts that occurred to you, questions you may have, whatever you feel compelled to share. Thank you.
I think Sandy has her hand up. Is that you, Sandy?
It is. Thank you. I had a question, just some things. I've been kind of scribbling really quickly because you're saying a lot of things that made a lot of sense. So I just wanted to kind of backtrack. You had mentioned something, and it's more than likely not verbatim, but in the beginner's mind are endless possibilities. In the experienced mind, there are few. Is that what you said? And who said that?
That was Master Shunryu Suzuki. Shunryu is spelled Shunryu. Suzuki is Suzuki.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question too. What are some best practices to cultivate more curiosity, just like in your daily interactions or in your daily life?
A really simple way to incorporate into your daily life that's not as involved as learning something new or spending time observing a child who or someone who's curious, is to have that beginner's mindset. And you can do it very simply by when you think you know the answer, ask why or how, what, when, and where. Just ask yourself a question. Or say to yourself, oh, really? Why? And sort of challenge yourself to think beyond just the first answer that comes to mind. It can be also simply as you're walking, observing and being curious about what you see along the way. A lot of times when we walk or drive someplace, we have the destination on mind. And so I must get to school. And here I am, and I'm driving. And because I've taken this route so often, I don't think of anything. I don't even realize I'm driving. My mind is just off thinking about everything else. And I'm so used to the route that nothing on the route really catches my attention. So change that. You can try a different route to school, so vary the scenery, or take the same route that you take to work or to school and try to notice something you haven't noticed before. So pay attention a little more to your surroundings without getting into an accident.
I do have a couple of things. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. So you also had mentioned a name, and I think you said Tikantri. You were talking about
Master Tek Kwan Tree.
Oh, yes.
Tikantri.
Tek
How do you
Kwan. Kwan, he's
spell that
actually
one?
he's a monk at our temple. Kwang is Quang. Tree is just Tri. Master
Oh, okay.
Tik. Oh yeah, Tik is Thich, and it means teacher or honored teacher.
Okay. And he's actually involved in this group.
He's a monk at our temple. He's the one who runs the meditation 101 groups on Saturdays.
Oh, okay. Okay. And I do have a question. Okay, so I'm sorry. My dog was underneath my chair. Sorry. Okay, so coming from a Christian background, raised Catholic, baptized in the Catholic Church and everything, which I love the Catholic Church. It's got beautiful symbolism and so many great ways to get you on the path and through the path and whatnot. That's where I'm coming from. I'm not a practicing Catholic. While Catholics are Christians and they come from, the Christian belief and everything, I've for my whole life have come from that, philosophy.
Okay.
So I have always been very curious about, Buddhism, because it just blows my mind. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, practice. And I guess we can call it a religion. So
you can. So that's it really depends on how you define religion. We have to be mindful that how Buddhism is practiced in the United States is different to how it's practiced in the East. And so in the East, it is more like a religion. While in the West, here in the United States, Buddhism is more of a philosophy and a psychology.
Okay.
And that's how it's typically practiced. There are still religious aspects to Buddhism as it's practiced here, but it's not as dogmatic as you might find in the Eastern religions.
Okay.
Now, having mentioned about your Catholicism and knowing that many of us here have a history and a grounding in Christianity, including myself, there is a really good book called Living Buddha, Living Christ.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Living Buddha, Living Christ by Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich is Thich. Nhat is Nhat. Hanh is Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh. Living Buddha, Living Christ. And this very well-known Vietnamese monk discusses the overlaps between Christianity and Buddhism, and there's a lot. You will, because both Christianity and Buddhism are based on this idea of compassion, of love, of kindness, then you will find that there's a ton of overlap between the two, and where they differ tends to be on the more dogmatic aspects.
Okay.
But in terms of how you're supposed to live your life, the daily ins and outs of being human, there's like almost a 95% overlap between Buddhism and Christianity.
Yeah.
So you're it's a beautiful book. I've read it twice, and I always go back to it every once in a while because it helps me. The further along I get on my spiritual journey in Buddhism, I gain a different perspective. And so when I can return to that book, when I can return to the Bible, when I can return to the Christian faith, I see it in new eyes, with new understanding that enriches the history that I have in that faith. And even though I'm no longer a practicing Christian, there's so much about it that I can still draw from. So much that I can still draw from the teachings of Jesus. And so that book is really good because it helps bridge those two faiths.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you for the recommendation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being curious.
Yes. I do. I was gonna kind of go a little further with
Go for it.
with the question, but I'm really interested in, and I'm really interested in forgiveness, because it always seems to be such a huge thing in most religions, I think. So I don't have a problem with forgiveness, but I think it's kind of ridiculous, because okay, hear me out, but everybody, but the thing is that because I think that forgiveness it just kind of comes around when someone has maybe done something to you that you really didn't like. It could be really bad, it could be horrible, but it's not for me to forgive. It's for something greater to forgive, because I think that forgiveness really is something else. It's like me figuring out for myself, why, depending on the harm that was done, figuring out how I'm going to get through it, because I could waste all my time trying to forgive someone when they could give a darn, and instead focus on how or why did I become so angry? Why did I become so hurt? And learn not to get there when people maybe are doing something bad. And and there's a huge gamut, I guess, too. Like I said, it could be something so simple, but then it can be really something, just criminally wrong, so, and you know what I mean? So I'm very curious about that, about forgiveness and different,
So
or philosophies.
I did a talk that was so, I think Lance was there, and he was the one who mentioned it was so dense and so full of information. And I believe I have it uploaded on Facebook, but when I tried to find it, I couldn't find it on Facebook. So I may have to try to upload it again. So I did a talk on forgiveness, and
I don't have Facebook, by the way. I don't do Facebook.
Okay, let me give you and all of you my email. If you send me an email, I can try and find a way of uploading it to maybe YouTube, and and then you can follow the link to YouTube and watch it there. I think what you'll find when you listen to that talk is that a lot of the Buddhist perspective on forgiveness really ties into what you said. And so forgiveness from the Buddhist perspective is very different from Christian forgiveness on the surface. But when you get down deep inside, both of them, again, a lot of overlap between the two. But the approach, how forgiveness is approached, is different from the Buddhist perspective. And it kind of lines up with what you, a good chunk of what you said. So since you have your pen and pencil out, let me give you my email. If anyone else wants my email, here it is. It's Alexander Q777 @yahoo.com. So Alexander Q777 @yahoo.com. If you shoot me an email, I will see if I can get it uploaded then to, I know that Thich Quan Tri has a YouTube page that he maintains. So I'll ask him to upload it there, and then I'll send you the link.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I probably should take Lance's suggestion and actually redo that talk, but break it down into smaller chunks because it was a very dense talk. So take copious notes because it covered a lot of information.
You know, one of the things that that when we were talking about forgiveness is it seems like forgiveness from the Buddhist point of view is it's almost done more for your own self than it is for the other person. Because when we cause another person suffering, and then that person leaves, well, that person at that point has nothing to do with your suffering anymore. You're just carrying it around with you, right? So in a way, you're saying, you know, it's not letting them off the hook, so to speak, right? You're not saying, hey, whatever you did is just fine, do it again, it won't bother me at all. That's not at all what we're saying. But I think we're saying that when people injure us, we suffer, and we continue to carry that suffering long after that the thing that's caused the suffering has come and gone. Remember impermanence, right? So everything is impermanent, it will eventually go away. So forgiveness is just a way of, in my mind, in my experience, is just kind of feeling like, you know, it's not that I'm saying what that person did is all right, but I'm gonna understand that the reason that they caused me pain is that they were in pain, right? And then they were in pain because the person before that hurt them was in pain, right? So it's this long connected thing that just goes on and on, sometimes even through families, you know, whole families, right? So forgiveness, I think, can be a way of just saying, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to allow this memory of the hurt. And like you said, sometimes it's physical. So this is very general, right? I mean, there's hurt, and then there's terrible hurt. But in many cases, it just seems like most of the time when I do that, I just feel like I've kind of unloaded something that I don't need to carry around anymore.
Yeah.
Good. That's a really good summary, Leon. Thank you. Does someone else have, I think someone else was trying to talk also. Does anyone else have anything to say?
I just had a quick question. What was that bias website? Do you remember?
I'll have to look it up. I know where I can find it. I don't have it on my mind right now. Did you write down my email also?
Yeah,
No?
I memorized it. It's pretty easy to memorize.
That's an easy one to remember.
I'm gonna have it forever now.
Okay, so if you shoot me an email, I will then find the link to the website, and I will I'll shoot you that website. I get depressed every time I do it because here I am thinking I am equanimous and not biased, and then I see I still am biased.
Where's
and
your
a lot
ego,
of it.
Alexander? Where's your ego? No, don't worry. I asked because my ego probably too. So
Oh, we all got it. And it goes back again to what I said. We are a product of our society. We grew up in a society that was filled with this bias, and we weren't aware of it because we were born into it. And it's going to take years, decades, for us to be able to undo the harm that has come from that bias. But being curious, as Lance is showing us right here, being curious about your bias, being humble and accepting that you are still biased, being humble and accepting that it's not all your fault. You know, that this was not like you purposely said, I want to be biased. It is you were a product of the education that focused on white males, Protestant white males as our leaders, and gave very little emphasis on educating us about the contributions of other cultures in the American history, for example. So that's a really good example of how we, unbeknownst to us, we were exposed to a bias. Media, you know, and things like that. All those things are biases that we're exposed to that we're not aware of, but they do influence our mind. And this website is a really good wake-up call to the fact that we still harbor that bias.
As
We
a
only have
third
about
grade
5
history
minutes
and
left.
Science teacher, I will tell you. Oh, you can't hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, okay, yeah, I would attest to those biases because I've had to teach a lot of them for a long time. And just this year, we finally gave Christopher Columbus the boot. And they've added, I know, you try to
It's
teach that.
amazing.
Yeah, try to teach that. But they've added a whole slew of incredible community heroes of all nationalities this year. So it's slowly bleeding into our curriculum. It's going to take, gosh, generations. But
Where do you teach?
I teach
If you don't mind.
Poteet Elementary, but this is the state of Texas. We all teach the same curriculum. So this is TEA. It's called TEACS, and I'm very hopeful that things are going to be a little bit different. But yeah, I see it every day, and I have it, and unfortunately, we pass it on, whether we realize it or not. And do the best you can, I guess.
Yeah. And so continue being curious about that bias, like being curious about where you got it from. And then while we may not be able to completely undo it in our own programming up here, being mindful of it helps us then try and undo it in the next generations, or helps us avoid trying to perpetuate some of that bias. So for example, I try to expose my children to more Black history than I got. And that's one way, and more of the histories of more about other religions as well than I got. And so, but I could not have done that without being curious about my own bias and acknowledging my own biases. All right. Let's wrap up there. Continue to be curious, cultivate curiosity. It has a lot of benefits when it is not ego-driven, when it is not a form of attachment, when it is an openness to explore. The curiosity can be very beneficial.